some more complex situations, but I wanted to present a situation where it's used as a productivity tool, not so much a data visualization, charting, that type of thing, but more just for a productivity. I did record the session so that I stay respectful for the amount of time. And if you are like me, that you really don't like listening to me too much, I don't like the sound of my own voice, the next 20 plus minutes are going to be a challenge, but I hope that there's content that's going to be worth it for you to enjoy. So I will, I'll share my session and I'll watch chat if you have any questions. Just give me a second here.
Thank you for joining us for a case study on the use of Power Query and Excel for the validation of Race's Edge and prospect data. My name is Stephen Rothstein. I work for the Amherst Edge Foundation in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm an IT analyst and I have over 20 years of nonprofit experience. My focus has been on looking at financial and fundraising data and developing strategies and analysis related to that data, as well as providing IT support. We are not the current Office 365 client. That limits some of the options that we have for business intelligence tools. And that's really specifically why I'm looking at Excel and Power Query as a efficiency tool and a data analysis tool for this process. The objectives, and just to provide a little bit of background, we want to be able to validate proposal information in Race's Edge for accurate reporting. But we want to also have just one export file out of Race's Edge for validation and reporting. The proposal information is not as of time data. So whenever we run to reporting and information, that's what we get. It's important to have point-in-time reports that our reports are consistent across the different business lines that we have, as well as a validation in for the report. Validate data use business rules prior to the reporting and comparing data. Review, I just want to look for those contradictory entries, those 4 or 5 records that we can identify and a person to be able to find. Process needs to increase even in front of you, but sometimes we want to go a little bit more. We want to be able to maximize the efficiency in data validation and data collection, and for ease of use. So this needs to be a quick and easy process to run, and also be very effective in, like I said, identifying those contradictory entries for analysis. Business changes, so we want to be able to allow for modifications in business rules and expanding business options. So this may be new business initiatives that redefine data, and maybe some different data elements that are within the process. But we are looking at just one business initiative at a time. And in this case, it's going to be grants and grant management process. The data source is Race's Edge and it's a proposal table. Now, the proposal table does have attributes associated with it, so we do pull an attribute as well for it. The constituent record, some data is being pulled from that as well as the constituency code. The selection and export out of Race's Edge, which I'm not going to be showing you at this time. I'm assuming that most people have comfort level and familiarity with running the queries within Race's Edge. It is run as a query. It will evaluate most of the proposals that we have in the database, although some are going to be eliminated with the query selection. The reality is that within the query selection, we're probably going to have duplicate proposals because of the table relationships of the proposal to constituent, proposal to attribute, constituent to constituency code. But those will be pared down as we go through the data selection process in Power Query. The output file is saved as a XLS, but it could be saved as others do for this process. I'm just partial to it. Excel files. If you're not familiar with Power Query, you may be asking what it is. So Power Query is a standard element of Excel 2016 and afterwards. It can be downloaded for some of the earlier versions of Excel, but starting in 2016, they made it as a standard element. Power Query allows a connection to an external data source and allows transformation of that data to complement reporting needs. Now, a data source can be a wide variety of different data types. So Excel spreadsheet is what you will be seeing, but it could just easily be a flat file. It could be a database, SQL, or other. So there's a wide variety of data sources that it can attach to. Power Query uses the same query language as what Power BI does. It has a very simple interface. The data is staged in a data model and is pushed into the spreadsheet either through a table or through pivot tables. And then the data is refreshed from the source through a refresh all command. And this is one of the menu items that you would see toward the top of on your spreadsheet. The data can be used in conjunction with other Excel tools, such as slices or timelines, to be able to do even more data engagement and refining. The Power Query extraction, transformation, and load process allows for the defining of what that data connection is, what file it connects to, what the location of it is. And then I listed here the filtering of the data that we have for part of the extraction process. I'm not going to go through it step by step, but you can get the idea that we apply conditions within the process to be able to limit the selections that we're pulling in so that we focus just on what we want for data and what we need for this particular process. The last part of the ETL process is to load the data actually into the Excel worksheet and be able to engage with it in a different way to be able to do our data test and validation. Why filter in Power Query instead of in Raises Edge? Well, some of the basic filtering already is being performed in Raises Edge. We're not selecting all the records in Raises Edge, but we want to be able to maintain flexibility in evaluating our data. So we want to be able to pull in more records than less, but we want to be able to use tools such as Power Query to pare them down for specific types of analysis. We use a single Raises Edge query for all proposal, analysis, and reporting. Like I said, it's a point in time. We want to be able to have just a single file so that it is accurate across all the other reports and analysis that we have. Accurate relative to the point in time, so that data doesn't change. Export a file is used for multiple reports, but the Power Query Expression Builder, and this is kind of a nice thing, actually works in sequence for fine-tuning of the selection. So the query and selection that you have is built into steps. You can actually step through the expression to evaluate your data. This does allow you to go to any one of those steps after you have it built and make modifications to those steps to further enhance it or improve your process. But any changes that you do make on preceding steps will affect any of the subsequent steps that you have through the process. So just keep that in mind if you ever make some of the changes to your steps that you might be messing things up as you go along, but you might also be making them better. The next test is to do the validation of that copy directory data, to look at those fields specifically that don't match, that are not logical expressions. And I'm not going to go through this step, but I do want to draw attention to some of the information that I have in bold that gives you an idea of what we're looking at. So first of all, we're testing for fiscal year. We're also testing for the amount asked and the date asked to see if one field's filled in but not the other. And then we tested in the inverse. So if the ask amount is filled in but the date is not, or the date is filled in and the ask amount is not, those are two different steps that we have to be able to compare that data. So it's within Excel that we're actually applying these tests to try and state in language what is the issue, Why doesn't it match? Well, in this case, it would be a over $0, but the ASCII is not filled in. That's an example. So now the case use for Power Query, I'm going to pull up, first of all, the Raises Edge export file and give you an idea of just what the data looks like. Now, this is some mocked up data that we have in the export out of Raises Edge. And it's typical Raises Edge fields and the information on the table, as well as attributes, as well as constituent codes and that type of thing. But it's simply a file of about 29 records being pulled in. It's the Raises Edge file. So I save the file to the same name and location every time. And this allows me then to have a validation file that uses Power Query to be able to attach to that information and pull it into Excel. So Power Query is, like I said, just a standard element within an Excel spreadsheet. But we can get to it through the data menu and then show queries if we already have one set up. If you don't have one set up, you can go over some of that information is and how to attach to it. But in this case, I do have queries set up. So I want to be able to take a look at that query, and I'll show you the step-by-step process of the extraction ETL process. So if I right-click on it and go into Edit, it will open up the query interface. Here are the applied steps that I mentioned that are in sequence. So the first one is the definition of what the source of that data is. Frequently, I can click onto the gear to the right-hand side to take a look and modify the expression as necessary. As you can see, I have it defined what the path of that is. I can change it if I need to. I can go on to the next step, and it will actually navigate to where within the source am I finding that information. And it's presenting that type of data. So as I continue to go through here, the next one is going to be promotion of headers. So you can see the like the heading fields over here are not yet column headers, but if I go into the next one, it actually pushes them up. It's going to change some of the data types and also filter some of the rows so that I can purify some of the information as what I'm seeing. Now that filtered rows, that's where I apply those conditions, that large condition sheet of records that I want to be able to see. And I can take a look at that step either through here or up through here as to what that step is doing. So in this particular case, it's looking for select rows, but it's defining what rows to find, where the prospect proposal campaign equals grants, for instance, and so on and so on and so on, what I have with my expression. I can either make modifications here if I want to, or I can go into the advanced editor and be able to make changes within here, which has the same language, but it has it for the entire expression. So I can make changes here as well. For this test case, my objective is to just select the records that pertain to what I want to see. So if I go back, there's several records that are being pulled, several records that are available that I don't want to pull in. Any of this null information on the bottom, some of these I don't want to pull in. Once I actually get down to the filtered rows, I have it pared down to about 19 records that I want to see. And it is through this interface that I also have a choice as to how to load the information. So I can load it to a table, I can leave it within the data model, and I've previously defined that. And I can do a close and load, and it will load it into the spreadsheet. So this is how I limit the records that I want to see, looking specifically at grant-related situations. The validation of the records and a comparison of information is done within Excel then. And I use a expression that applies the tests that I have written out. I just wrote this out for to better describe what I'm looking at for tests. As I showed you in the slides, that I'm looking at fiscal year, I'm looking at this ask amount, and so on. I'm applying each one of these tests to each one of the 19 records across. So what I've done is I've wrote a conditional formula that looks for it. Now, that conditional formula may look rather complex. It's actually very basic. It has an if statement, so there's nested functions within here, within the if statement, that need to be valid across the tests. And if that information is valid, it's going to give me return no information, empty set. If it is not valid, if the information does not match with something, it's going to give me an expression saying what the problem may be. And what I've done is I've used a concatenate expression and the ifs within it for the tests to kind of sew together these tests. So this first expression of concatenate goes up through here. And it just sews together the expressions, the if statements. If anything is returned, it will have that as part of the expression. If everything matches where it's not a problem, then it's just going to return an empty set. So the objective was to have in clear language what some of the data comparison issues were. And I use this expression across each one of the functions below. So for a normal monthly process, I never manipulate or change the data extraction transformation process, the ETL process. I simply come in and do a refresh all, and that updates the data that quickly. It applies these expressions to each of the records, and it allows me to see what that information is. And that's all assuming that I save the source file out of Raises Edge to the same location. So now I need to just simply unselect the blanks, and I've got my set of records that have contradictory data that need to be looked at. And I also have a description as to what that information or what the contradiction is. All right. Validation considerations within Power Query. Since all the data is at a record level, validation of this information could have been done in Power Query as well. I decided to do it within Excel because I wanted to sew together that concatenation expression. Those if statements, those tests for each of the data elements, I wanted to sew it together with concatenate to give a single expression of what the data contradiction was. I could have done that in Power Query as well, but I would need to have built multiple expressions within Power Query and assemble them together in a very similar format. That would have been more challenging, and also would have taken more time to develop that process and test it to make sure that it is testing that data effectively. Whereas within Excel, it was a lot easier to be able to copy those expressions to each other and be able to make those minor modifications for that data and string it together. So the conditional fields can be easily added to Power Query, but the expression does become more complex. As you saw within the expression that we took a look at, while it does use the same query as what Power BI does, the same query language, it does get to be more and more complex for each of the fields that you have and each of the conditions that you apply to those fields. So it gets to be a large mess that you start taking a look at. I wanted to divide that mess into different areas. I wanted part of it to be in Power Query, part of it to be in Excel, so it was a little bit more manageable. So the validation considerations within Excel. The fortunate thing about Excel is that there's more familiarity with Excel's to condition and nested functions. Within Power Query, having those nested functions often would have to be written with using a query language that's listed there from a raw source, from basically a blank palette. It does with Excel too, but Excel can encourage you and prompt you with some of the values for where you are within the function that you have, even if it is nested within another function. The output in this case is string comments creating one statement, and that is something that we definitely wanted as the objective. We didn't want to have, if there were 2 or 3 different data exceptions, to have it spread out. We want to be able to have one clear statement as to what the information was. We can more readily validate an expression and copy for additional uses as needed. There's part of that flexibility with some of the data changes and some of the changes in the business needs, that if we need to look at different fields for comparisons, we can do that more easily with Excel. Excel allows for quick and easy edits, not having to go into the Power Query editor. And Excel is so common that sharing the information through Excel is well received by those who need to make the changes. And the people who do make the changes are the ones that take a look at really engage the data record, the data sets within Razor's Edge. So they will be handed out these 4 or 5 records to them that they can take a look at and understand what fields need to be changed. So Power Query and Excel versus Power BI, Tableau, or others. I put them into a separate set, although Power Query and Excel is maybe not as robust, certainly for the visuals, than what the others are. So there were a series of questions that we really asked in this process. So are there charts or other visuals required? In this case, no. We just want to do some data validation, and we want to do it in a very effective and efficient process. So the investment time to build the process, it had to be small. We didn't have much time to be able to develop this. It was a process looking at an existing file just to clean up some records where we could potentially have reported some misinformation. How many people will analyze the data? It's going to be a very few set of people. Honestly, we have a very few number of records that are going to be in error, but we'll hand it off to people that constantly work with the data, and we'll be able to understand where some of those missing data elements are. Is output being used for decision making? No, not in this case. It's only being used for data correction. So it is for clarification. It's for recognition of where we have some data issues. Are the business rules fluid? Yes, definitely. So we need to be able to change over time, and we could do that within any of those applications. But as you see with the method that's being used at Power Query and Excel, is actually complementary to making some of those changes. Our reporting frequency is monthly, and the investment time to run this process, they have to be a low level of investment. So you can imagine a query being run out of Razor's Edge. It takes 15, 20, 25 seconds. And then once it's saved to a location locally, and this file is attached to it, you open up this file, do a refresh, and you've got your information. It takes literally a minute or less to be able to update this information each time. Now, the expertise and the support of the process, yeah, we do have Excel expertise, not so much with the other applications. Primarily because we're not an Office 365 environment, so we don't have Power BI as an option effectively. Tableau licensing issues can reduce some of the expertise for supporting processes, but certainly in Excel we do have expertise. Excel and Power Query, while other tools could be used, Power Query was used because of Excel's wide user proficiency as ease of development, as well as the low investment time for monthly updates. Power Query does have a dependency, that does not have a dependency on the hosted platform for user analysis, which means that this is very easy to hand off to other people as necessary. And in fact, if as a developer, I don't necessarily have to run this every month. I can hand it off to somebody else to be able to run on their own, as long as they have credentials to be able to link to the source file.
Sorry about that at the 20-minute mark where my dog wanted to make herself known. So I appreciate that. But that's the presentation I had with the use of Power Query. And I've actually noticed a lot of the presentations that we've had today, really good, or this week, really good presentations, a lot of them involving Power BI. And what sticks on my mind is the how nice it is to have the same query language with Power BI as we can have with Power Query within Excel. If there's not going to be a huge amount of time investment into developing an application, create it in an Excel, creating a very quick, even something that's a initial development platform that might need to move on to a Power BI platform eventually. At least you've got the query language for the ETL process. It's a nice thing to have. Yeah, Sam, that's what I struggle with a little bit as well. Is what are your options really if you're not a Microsoft 365 client? And I realize that it's going to be a point in time where virtually everybody's going to be a 365 client. But what do you do today? And one thing that we're doing is we're getting ready. We're building some of these tools. We're understanding the language. We're taking care of our data actually, and prepping ourselves and our environment for when we do make the move sometime in the future.